Can you introduce yourself, please?
I am Hannah Wallen, one of the founding members of Honey Badger Radio. I'm also author of Breaking the Glasses, writer for A Voice for Men, and person whose computer just got killed by lightning.
Can you tell us a little bit of some of the work you do?
I do a lot of writing for sites like A Voice for Men, for the Honey Badger Brigade, for the Breaking the Glasses blog, which is my blog. I'm mostly arguing men's issues and in support of fathers, keeping fathers in contact with their families and in connection with their families, especially in their families, and arguing against violations of due process rights, arguing against chipping away at civil rights, and arguing against gendering human rights legislation and laws that affect human rights.
Can you give us like an example that you can remember?
Yep, one good example is I've made a few videos talking about the wrongness of changing the United States federal domestic violence law from a genderless version, which was what was it called? The Family Violence Services and Protection Act of 1984 to the Violence Against Women Act of 1994 that gendered everything and funded biased research on all of the sites that are gendered now, so that it's set up to sort of have this self-perpetuating cycle of obtaining evidence based by ignoring men's experiences to make it look like women are the only victims.
I looked up statistics and stuff, and like for the domestic violence, I've noticed that it's almost 50-50 with perpetrators being male or female.
Yeah.
And with that, like, can you give us maybe some thoughts on that, and maybe some thoughts on no domestic violence places for men to go?
Yep. Well, for one thing, they've known, like the type of advocates that have come out with lobbying that have worked to create domestic violence shelters and so on, have known since the 60s, really, that this was a two-way street, that women and men both commit domestic violence, that it's not something that's the most common thing in families, but where it does happen, about half the time it's both members of the family, both the husband and the wife that are doing it, and women actually initiate more than men. And that kind of makes sense because women are more entitled to hit. We don't get seen as violent, for instance, if we slap somebody because we're offended at what they said. But if a man slapped a woman because he was offended at what she said, that's recognized as violence. And if we were to alter society so that it would be recognized as violence to slap somebody for saying something offensive no matter what, I think we would see a reduction in domestic violence. And then, of course, having it gendered like that, having it so that there's no place for men to go. Combine that with divorce laws, which punish men for getting divorced by making them pay either alimony or in property loss or in child support. You end up with a situation where if a man is being abused, his abuser has plenty of legal tools to force him to stay in the relationship instead of him being able to escape. And with there not being anything to help him get out, it's actually worse for men than it would be for women if they had nothing. They don't have that situation where if they get divorced, they're going to get penalized with alimony or child support or a division of property that does not favor them.
Yeah. Is there any other men's rights issues that you think are exceptionally important?
There's a number of them. Obviously, there needs to be some serious attention paid to the boy crisis in education, where education's been really geared more towards girls' learning styles, and they've left boys behind. And it's not a bad thing to look at how boys and girls learn differently and strive to make sure girls don't get left behind. But it is a bad thing to, because of that, alter education so dramatically that boys get left behind. It's simply swinging the pendulum the other way. And in doing so, it creates another injustice instead of fixing things. And there's no reason really why both sexes cannot be accommodated in the education system. And if there were such a reason, then it would be time to segregate the education system by gender so that both sexes could be served. So that's a big one. Another one is intactivism. Here we have, in our society, we recognize very well that it's wrong to cut the genitals of a little girl. We figured out that genital cutting is damaging and painful and unnecessary, even if people think it's cleaner, even if there's a cultural reason, even if there's a religious belief behind it. We still don't recognize a right to do that because we do recognize that it's an abuse. But while we recognize that all over the world with girls, it is much less recognized when the genitals belong to a boy. And here in the United States, it's very common to cut genitals in infancy. And it's even done under the guise of medical treatment, using exactly the same arguments and exactly the same flawed research that is used to excuse cutting girls' genitals.
I did read a little bit about that, and so I'm not like too super versed on it, but I did read a little bit about it, and there are like 3 different cuts that they can make.
Mm-hmm.
And I found it like surprising that most places, instead of using the least amount of cut, if you're going to cut at all, I found it surprising that they cut off like the cut that they usually do, the cut that's the most.
Yeah. There's usually a much tighter cut in the United States. And there's actually 10 different degrees of how much can be done. And if you get to the most dramatic cut, there's actually damage that is so noticeable that, even they call it botched, which, every circumcision is a botched circumcision. There's no such thing as a functional circumcision. It's always botched because you're cutting off functional tissue, and it's needed functional tissue. It's not just something that's there for recreation. And even if it was, it's still the baby's tissue. It's not the doctor's tissue. It's not the mother's tissue. It's not the father's tissue. And so it's always botched. But there are circumcisions that are so tight that an erection can become painful. There are circumcisions that are so tight that it pulls the skin from the testicles up onto the shaft of the penis during an erection.
Oh, wow.
And so you have, the penis has hair all the way up, and which makes it very difficult to wear a condom, because as soon as you unroll one of those things over hair, and it rolls back up a little bit, it rolls the hair up and it pulls. So, that's a really painful thing to have happen to somebody. And of course, there's other things. There's skin bridges. There's all kinds of damage that can occur. And it's a really ridiculous thing that we are continuing to do this as a society.
What age would you say is appropriate for decision making for that if a boy wanted it done?
The same age at which he could get a piercing without his parents' permission, if that's what he wanted.
Okay.
And if he can get a piercing, then he, or a tattoo, then he can make his own decision with respect to circumcision.
Okay. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
Well, in addition to those issues, I've mentioned the due process rights issue, I've mentioned fatherhood, I've mentioned intactivism, I've mentioned boys in education. The one that I really haven't talked about is suicide. And I think some of those other issues contribute very strongly to that. But the majority of successful suicides, pretty much all over, are men and boys. And this is something that doesn't get addressed very often. And one of the things that seems to be in the way of it getting addressed is the claim that women attempt more often, as if that makes it less of a big deal that boys and men are dying at the rate that they are dying from it. And it's pretty clear that, in doing that, feminists are kind of looking for victimhood rather than looking for solutions to the problem. And I think one of the biggest issues with respect to male suicide is men aren't allowed to complain if their suicidal tendencies or their depression or their anything that's causing them to consider suicide. They're not allowed to complain if among their complaints are that somebody did something to them that is protected, like female class, or they're complaining about something that happened to them because of a minority. They're stuck So they can't resolve the issue. The only thing that's left to them is to struggle against the tendency to commit suicide or give into it. And one of the examples of that would be, if a man is made homeless by his child support obligation, if he's, forced into an obligation by imputed income, the judge says you should be making more money, or I think you're making more money, and I'm going to base your child support on higher income than I can prove you have. And so now his income is all being seized, and he cannot pay his bills, he can't afford a place to live, and he's on the streets. He becomes suicidal if he complains about that, rather than saying, this really isn't fair. This man can only earn this much money, and yet they're taking all of it, so now he's homeless. You're a deadbeat dad, even though in other circumstances other men might not be asked to pay as much.
And he can't even see his kid anymore because you have to have a home.
Right. You end up being alienated from your children, and that's another one. There are a lot of divorce situations in which the mother does alienate the child from the father. And there's a fairly large percentage, something like 42 or 43% of women that were surveyed didn't think the father was important to their child's life after divorce. And there were a number of them that confessed to custody interference. So here you have the person that means the most to you in your life, your child, has been ripped away from you, and now you're not even allowed to be a part of their life. And this is, of course, also going to contribute to suicide. And as soon as a man complains about that, he's bad-mouthing his ex-wife. And there have been men who have been court-ordered to be silent about this on social media. And I recently spoke to Mr. Dragonbeard. He calls himself Mr. Dragonbeard. He's one who has gone through that. He's gone through some serious problems in court with his ex-wife, and he's not allowed to talk about it. He's not allowed to say anything on social media. Judge ordered him to, it's considered harassing her if he talks to his friends and his family about what she did to him.
Wouldn't this be going against the free speech?
It would be. It's not like he's directing at her. Now, in the United States, we have free speech. He's outside the United States, so he's not quite covered under our free speech laws.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing that it's really a violation of is his human rights. Just even if we don't use terms like free speech, even if we don't use, the United States as an example of this is the way it's supposed to be, you have the human right to speak out when someone has committed a wrong against you. You have the human right to contact with your family. Unless you are in a situation where you simply can't do it, you're overseas and you can't contact them. Nobody's doing anything wrong at that point. But if somebody is standing in the way of you having contact with your child and you haven't done anything to deserve that, then your human rights are being violated. And it's the child's human rights are also being violated. But it's something that should be world recognized.
It's funny though, because since single mother homes raise the most criminals.
Yeah, we do have that situation. There's also a 50%,
so obviously the father must be
very important. There's also a 50% greater chance of a child being raised in a single mother home becoming a single parent themselves. There's a higher chance of them being dependent on welfare. So it's very damaging to remove a parent from the equation. Now, we don't know as much about overall about single fathers. There's not enough single fathers who get custody to give a really good data set for that. We have mitigating factors, basically. Mm-hmm. In order to be a single dad with custody of your child, you have to prove that you're a stellar parent. You have to prove that you're financially stable. So single dads are more likely to be financially stable. Big surprise. They're more likely to have a stable household, and their kids are more likely to be successful. Well, we want to be able to say that we are better than feminists at taking those types of mitigating factors into account. So what we have found that we can look at is the research on single moms. And when you take one parent out of the equation all of the time, when you don't have a standard for parenting, when you don't allow the father into the child's life, and you do allow the mother to interfere with the child being able to see the father, those are the conditions that cause this discrepancy in criminal behavior, and the fact that there's more kids from single mother homes that become criminals when they grow up, more kids that become single parents, more kids that become welfare dependent, and it's not necessarily because that's just the way women are. It's because a woman does not have to prove that she's a stellar parent to be able to unilaterally parent the child. She doesn't have to prove that she's in a financially stable environment. In fact, the father can be forced to make up for that if she's not, even if he can prove that he's a great parent and he has a stable home, a financially stable home. The mother still gets custody of the child. So that's what's really leading to the dysfunction, is that the standards are not the same for both parents, and we're not giving kids equal time.
I found that I read many stories where the women were quite bitter and would set the children against the father. And so
parental alienation is what it's called.
Yes,
Yeah.
and I always found that a bit strange myself.
Yeah, it's.
And I think personally, I think if a mother shows signs of doing that she should be stripped of the child, because I think that is extremely damaging
It's
to the child's
abusive.
psychological wellness.
Yeah, there's a video on YouTube. A little girl talks about she's not a little girl in the video. I mean, she's a little older girl, but she talks about what it was like to go through that with her parents and her mother trying to alienate her from her father, and what she experienced psychologically and emotionally because of that. And
Can you tell us what she said?
Yeah, it's for one thing, having your mother tell you that your father is bad is like having the same part of you is bad, because you come from both parents.
Mm-hmm.
And saying that you love something bad. So it hurt her not only because she was defensive towards her father, but also because it was a statement on her as well. And it's been a while since I've seen this, but if I recall, she talked about developing a bitterness and anger, that she wasn't going to have before her mother started this. Now, I've seen this with other kids too, and the really hard part, it's there's two different things that can happen, really basic things that can happen. Either it works or it doesn't work. If it works, a lot of times the child later on finds out that they hated their parent, or they're angry at their parent, and they rejected the other parent when in fact they had been lied to all the time. And that is really gut-wrenching to see somebody go through realizing. The other one is if it doesn't work, the child is constantly, they feel like they're caught in the middle. And they're constantly having to play referee between mom and dad. And it's very, very stressing for the child. In fact, it can be deeply painful. And it can also cause a terrible psychological response. Not only because the child is being criticized for, again, you love something bad. You have no judgment. But they also have a sense of injustice that goes along with it. I know this is true and you're telling me it's not. But your kid can't call bullshit on you because they're your kid and you have authority. And it really puts them in a bad position. And either way, it's very abusive. What ends up happening in both cases is it comes back on a parent that strives to alienate the children from the other parent. The child doesn't trust the alienating parent. The child ends up resenting what the alienating parent has done. They end up seeing the alienating parent as a liar and a cheat, and in some cases a thief of time and a thief of affection. And it really is a damaging thing to the relationship. And it's very hard to repair that damage. In fact, I've really never seen a parent repair that after it's been done.
Mm-hmm. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
Not really to that.
Okay. Well, if you'd like to, say the YouTube for the honey badgers and the website.
Well, Honey Badger's YouTube, we're just called Honey Badger Radio. And, excuse me,
It's okay.
if you search Honey Badger Radio on YouTube, then you'll find us. The website is honeybadgerbrigade.com.
And can you tell us about the meeting that you organized today?
The meeting that I organized today?
Yes.
Well, this was just basically an informal get-together. And my goal was kind of to try to bring together people that are local to my area. Because there's been a lot of events, and I've been to a lot of events. And to be honest, I've had to get on a plane for everything except for the first Men's Rights Conference, and I had to get on a bus to get to that. So there's really not much that's been around here. And I know that a lot of people can't go to London, a lot of people can't go to Canada, a lot of people couldn't even go to Detroit. So I thought it'd be nice if I could get some people together who are more local, and maybe they could meet up with each other, and I'd get to meet everybody, and we'd get to sit around and have some conversation and play some games. And we had a really good time so far. We played Cards Against Humanity, we played some video games. We went around the Air Force Museum and looked at things, and talked about some of the stuff that was in there, and talked with each other about men's issues and things that have happened with Gamergate and stuff that we did that was involved with that, and so on. So it worked out really well.
You called it a success then today.
Yeah, definitely a
Yes.
success. Definitely want to do it again.
Mm-hmm. Will you have more of an informal one, or will you try to make a more formal get together?
If I'm gonna organize it myself, it'll probably always be informal because I'm kind of a lazy scumbag. So I'm more likely to make it laid back, something that we could just hang out at, and it doesn't have to be anything with a tight schedule or anything like that.
Okay. Well, thank you so much.
Thanks.
We want to drop.